Are we live? I think we're live. Hello, everybody. It's Smiles. Age 114 final changes. We don't have, how do you call it? Race spoilers for last age. So I might switch over to this sometimes to see what's going on. Anyways, without further ado, let's get started. We're expecting the age to start on the 28th of January. The Age of Convergence. I feel like we've had that one before. Bunch of nonsense. Armies move with purpose. Spells strike harder. Do they? Defenses hold longer. Do they? Opponents lose control. Well, that's true. Choices compound. Don't they always? Coordination wins. Doesn't it always? Neglect is punished. Isn't it always? Anywho, let's get to it. First, mechanical change. Defects are no longer ignoring Kingdom Wall if you are at 22 provinces or above. So, no longer are you choosing to run 22 to 24 provinces and still getting defects into your kingdom. That's probably a good change for those people. I can't imagine defects are any good. I imagine the average defector is worse than the average player. So, like average new province. So I understand. War or battle doctrines. Each race has a war doctrine that applies kingdom-wide during war. War doctrine strength scales with the number of provinces of that race up to a defined cap. The base value for every race is 1.5% of the bonus. The increment is 1% addition per province of that race, and the maximum cap is 7.5%. All of them are 7.5% except Avian. I do believe that means Avian is maxed out at 5 provinces instead of 7. That is all. You'll see, I'll probably, when discussing races, sort of just add that full bonus to the race and think about it when it comes around to, full kingdom setup ideas. That's a little more in-depth than what this change video is, but we'll talk about it a little bit. Massacre changes. Massacre effectiveness in war is now 2 times instead of 3 times. This is, I think, the change everyone expected. I don't think this means Massacre's useless. A lot of the value of the current meta of Massacre that we see is actually the ability to do repeated hits to someone, and it lowers their defense, and, certainly removing their wizards and thieves helps, and peasants, but just the ability to knock down their defense so much is really a big benefit as well. It lets you raise them. It lets them just be empty and useless. Of course, this does nerf Massacre significantly, but I don't think it's, unusable. And I think there might even be some ability to use learns in war instead of Massacres or in conjunctions with them. So we'll see how that works out. Kingdoms like mine have been doing a lot of the Massacre game. Kingdoms like Hidden, I think a lot of people have sort of also been mimicking that style. Is it too strong of a style? Is Massacre too strong? I don't know. I don't think necessarily, but I think maybe people just think it's bad for the health of the game. I haven't warred Hidden in 2 years just because why subject myself to that? It's just boring. And when you do Massacre-based wars, it's almost never a min-time war, because it does so much long-term damage that it's a little harder sometimes to see it in the, 48-hour time frame. So, is what it is. Learns and plunders now do full kills in war. The fact that wasn't in the game for so long is just embarrassing. But, it's fixed now, or maybe it isn't, we'll see. Out of war attack penalty update. If you're targeting a kingdom less than 85% of your land and net worth, the following penalties apply. Gains minus 10%, casualties plus 10%, Honor gains minus 25%, attack time plus 20%. Pretty rough. Maybe not the end of the world. A lot of times one wave is sort of all you're doing, and in that case the attack time's not the biggest deal. People aren't really farming that much honor unless they're the number 1 ranked kingdom. 10% casualties is negligible. 10% gains does sort of go beyond the margins there when it comes to trading hits. I don't love anything that helps out micros, because micros are mean and they're scary and they're hard to deal with. But, figure out ways to deal with them, I guess. And, don't be afraid to swing up. Swinging up is a lot of the fun parts of this game. Hit people bigger than you, see what happens. Dragons. We have new dragons to add some flavor. Several dragons have been reworked. No, they haven't. Reading. I don't know. Seems made up. Elites deal dragon damage based on their highest value. So this is no longer combined damage. For example, your 14-4 elite will deal 14 damage to the dragon, not 18. And dragon HP reduced by 10%. So this is essentially just a straight revert to what the old system was like. I think technically dragons have 1% less health if they did it correctly than they did, 3 or 4 or 5 ages ago. But I don't think that'll matter. With the elite values we see, especially on attackers, dragons are certainly slayable. But it's really hard to slay dragons with defense in the current changes, so I'm curious how this all works out, and when you add things like a buffed greed to the mix, it's going to be interesting. New dragon, Amethyst Dragon, minus 40% spell success, minus 40% thievery success, and plus 25% thievery and wizard losses on failed spells and operations. So you certainly don't want to do ops through this, but it doesn't actually do any damage. Like, you can't send the Amethyst and then do a bunch of your own ops effectively like you can with a Sapphire. Like, literally nothing stops you from having an Amethyst on you and just waiting, and then doing all your shit when the Amethyst, like, when your armies are home, slaying it, and then doing all your stuff there. So outside of a situation where you're forced to tank it indefinitely, or it's sent right at the start of a war and you need to slay it, I really don't see the use of Amethyst. It seems like a bad dragon. Emerald Dragon, I believe, is just the same. I think it actually got nerfed, which I think is weird because Emerald wasn't really used as far as I could tell. I believe it used to be 50% minus credits and 25% gains. I could be wrong. So Emerald, essentially no change, maybe slightly nerfed. Celestite Dragon, minus 60% birth rate, minus 40% hospital effectiveness, plus 50% build time and cost. Again, you send this dragon and nothing happens to the opponent instantly. There's no advantage. They don't have higher losses, lower defense. You can't break them easier. It's just, if you're tanking a dragon, this one might be bad. But all the dragons are bad to tank, so I'm not entirely sure what role this dragon has. I can't imagine a situation where minus 40% hospital effectiveness is stronger than plus 25% military casualties. As for the build time, again, if you just wait and kill the dragon, this does no effect. So you send the dragon, you hang on to it for a few hours, and then slay it, and you lost a couple ticks of birth rate. It's kind of just like a kingdom-wide chastity for the cost of a dragon. I don't know if that's better than, a kingdom-wide riots and, super blizzard and they lose buildings. I don't see how this is going to outperform a topaz or a ruby or really any dragon that's hard to tank. So I think they missed the mark on the new dragons pretty heavily. But is what it is. Ruby Dragon, I think, is identical. Maybe these used to be 25%, so Ruby and Emerald basically not changed. Topaz basically not changed. I think it used to be 25% build efficiency. It used to be every 4 ticks you lost 3% of your land. So essentially identical. They just changed a percentage here or there. I don't know what the value is. Sapphire, I think it might have been used to be 25%. So, they just add and subtract 1 or 5% damage to things and, clap their hands and say good work, everybody, I guess. So yeah, I think the dragons missed the mark here. Rituals, however, completely opposite opinion. I think the rituals are awesome. So barrier ritual, 20% birth rates, minus 25% damage from ops and magic, minus 20% massacre damage, minus 10% enemy gains. So the birth rate's new, and I think this used to be 20%, not 25% damage. The massacre's new, though I don't think the massacre damage is too significant. I think barrier's legit. I think 20% birth rate stacking with the minus damage does a lot when it comes to fireball and peasants. I think even the massacre damage has some value here. I think barrier ritual has a place. Is it necessarily the strongest or OP? Not at all, but I can see it being pickable as is. So that's fun. Expedient, same as last age, I believe. Maybe it didn't used to have construction time. I forget. But 20% building efficiency is actually a lot compared to 10%. It's basically the biggest buff of Expedient got doubled. Again, I can absolutely see this being used a lot more, even in war, especially while sitting out of war. Good change. I like it. Ascendancy, essentially just divided all the numbers by 2, so you're getting less wizards. I think that's fine. As is, 100% Ascendancy essentially was 2 WPA per core per end of war ceasefire if they wanted it, which just felt like a bit much. And, now it's just going to be 1.5, but, that stacks up. So I like that change. Haste, unchanged, strong, used all the time. Havoc, buffed. The damages are buffed, and the damages, I think, are more significant, especially at that 20% range. I like it. I thought Havoc was very weak before, and with 20% damages involved, I think that's bordering on useful. Onslaught, no change, 10% OME and 15% casualties. A staple for kingdoms everywhere, no change there. Stalwart, 5% defense, minus 20% military casualties. It's certainly gone down in use a lot. I think more people are just relying on hospitals. And I think, I actually ran a little Stalwart this age for the first time in a while, and I enjoyed it, actually. So I think it has use. I think there's some value to it. So honestly, I think the rituals are in an excellent spot. Everything seems viable, has its niche, and I think you can work any of them into your builds. Greed has a significant buff from 25 to 30% wage and draft cost. I like the change. I've been saying for a while that it seems a little too difficult to eco-starve people in war. I think this is a great change to start doing that. So I'm happy to see. And we'll get into the races. Avian, first off, Doctrine. 5% attack time in war. A strong buff. That's, let's call it half as good as haste, half as good as quick feet. So, it's as strong as a, half of a really good spell. And that goes to everyone in the kingdom. So you have 5 avians. You can be making, 20 attackers 5% faster. That's sort of like minus 20% attack time. It's not really, but it's sort of. If you think about it that way, you shouldn't, but you can. So, minus 25% attack time when you stack the two, minus 40% training time. I'm not particularly interested in training time. It's a decent economic benefit. It has some value in war, but I don't really consider it something that has a lot of strength to it. Opportunistic Raiders, learns and plunders, return 1 tick faster after modifiers. Based on my calculations, you can't do anything really game-breaking with this, and it's, you're not doing many learns and plunders in war, so it's, just such a minor benefit. Maybe there's some use to being able to learn people in war a little faster, but sort of a do-nothing passive, so certainly a nerf there. As for spells, they've got essentially the full Cleric lineup, where they've got Illuminate Shadows, Divine Shield, and Salvation. So now every Avian is an Avian Cleric. They still have that Town Watch, even though they don't have the birth rate. Always good on heavy attackers getting chained. Penalties cannot ambush. That's new. That's a rarity for Avian. Basically worthless. Nobody ambushes anything anyways. But the exception here is that orcs are so easy to ambush next age that, it might be a bit of a problem that you can't ambush orcs. In a lot of situations, an Avian is sort of a really strong counter to orcs because of the speed and ability to really chain them faster, just because it's a no defense situation, and lap them. So with that change, with no ambushes, maybe it's a little closer to even. Of course, no access to stables and war horses. Their military is a very nice 16/6 elite that only costs 900 gold, very affordable. 13.0 spec is excellent. That's better than most mounted O specs usually. They do have a nerf with the 9D spec. That's a pain, no doubt. But militarily, Avian's super solid. Attack time's wonderful. They no longer have casualty nerfs. They can build barracks. Avians have a lot going for them. Now, what did they lose? They lost that birth rate. They lost Reflect Magic, but they did gain some spells to compensate. No more plus casualties or barracks restrictions is really good buffs. Their elite is much better, both defensively and offensively. Their O-spec's better. So really, they just lost, 10% defense, which isn't nothing, but they gained a lot in exchange. So based on other buffs that we may or may not see on other races, Avian's looking very strong to me, though they did lose that amazing Skybound unique, and it got replaced with something not nearly as nice, so you can't just pick this as a automatic win against TMs anymore, but, Avian's got a lot else going for them, so keep your lookout for Avians. Dark Elf. Bit of a change here. First off, the biggest thing you'll notice is a 15.0 spec. An O spec that's as strong as essentially any other elite in the game, most ages. And then you'll also see similarly an 8-point D spec, essentially worthless. Blech. But they have the defensive elite. It's really cheap. You'll be able to afford it. It's probably worth training out of war. It's not quite as cost effective, but in terms of population density, it's really good. And a 15-12 army is totally legit. Minus 25% birth rate, I believe, is the same penalty. Now, what do you have? You have a Doctrine, 7.5% instant spell damage. That's really good for fireballs. That's about it. I guess also Nightmare, but mostly fireballs is what you're looking at. Everybody likes fireballing better. They have the built-in 25% instant damage as well. 50% minus rune cost with a passive that is instant spells have a further 20% rune cost reduction. They can train thieves using spec credits. And what do they have for spell list? They lost Guile and Invis, so they lost all of that sort of hybrid thief power. But they kept the Mage's Fury. They lost their WPA. That's significant, keep in mind. But they kept Mage's Fury, so they're still decent offensively, but they don't have that innate protection. They have Illuminate Shadows, which also the Avians had, so a little bit of Thief protection. They have Quick Feet. So a 15-12 army with Quick Feet is suddenly a really viable attacker. What you don't have is any really built-in attacking benefits, but your base attacking stats are really legitimately strong, and you have the, easy land lusts and fireballs to back it up. So, not really a TM pick anymore. Maybe you can try and make it work with a 12-point elite, but I think with the offense inflation we see this age, you're not going to love it. They lost that WPA, they lost Invis, and, they gained a lot. No more wage penalty, much stronger military numbers. And they essentially have their unique permanently now, whereas, it used to be 12 hours a day. Well, 2 hours a day, sorry. Anyways, yeah, Dark Elf's very strong. They did lose that WPA nerf, but other than that, everything about them's stronger. So keep that in mind. Big instant damage caster hybrid. Dwarf. Dwarf was pretty much the least picked, least seen race of Age 113. So how have they improved? Built-in minus 50% construction time, 20% building credits in combat, pretty small bonuses. The 25% building efficiency is, of course, your classic dwarf bonus. Provides up to 7.5% spec credits gained in combat for you in the kingdom. Not the strongest doctrine either. Unique passive, incoming raise damage reduced by 15%, and outgoing raise damage increased by 20%. They did not fix the wording, which they promised they would. Anywho, it's not plus 20%, it's multiplied by 1.2, which we probably all knew, but seriously, figure out your language problems. As for spells, they gained Reflect Magic and Mist and Town Watch. They still have Miner's Mystique, a nice little eco buff. Reflect Magic's the big one here. Mist also. When you're build efficiency stacking, it becomes really useful to just be able to, mitigate enemy magic. So that's what's going to reduce your BE and make you weaker. And if you're unable to get hit for a lot of land, you keep more of your acres, which again makes your BE better. Or more valuable, or whatever you want to call it. Can't accelerate construction, but you have the built-in minus 50% construction time. Not a big deal. 10% attack time is a modest nerf. 16-hour attacks out of war, and in war, 13.2. You're going to really want to run some barracks, and that eats into your total build count. But if you are stacking attack speed, this becomes a little less significant. Militarily, a 15-9 elite is... you will have TM's level of defense if you're running like a 12-8 or whatever. That's 200 raw defense per acre home, which is easily going to be modded into 300 plus, and essentially you can't be hit armies in. So that's nice. 15-point elite is definitely strong enough to break TMs. It's a really high offense number. You have the +1 D-spec. So a similar army to the Dark Elf, but you really take a big benefit from the elite home defense. And you're going to want to leverage that. If you're not leveraging this defensive elite, you're really not going to, come out on top as a dwarf. If you compare to Dwarf Last Age, +2 offense on the elite, a cheaper elite, lots more defense, both D-spec and the elite defense, no WPA penalty, more spells, unique that's maybe not better, but maybe not worse either. So, I think the dwarf is playable. I know a lot of people want to say it's shitty. Its doctrine is certainly not amazing. But I can see some use for dwarves. I don't think you're going to be running a full slot of 5 or 6 of them, but maybe a couple of them have a place. So we'll see. Elf. WPA went up slightly. They still have 1 mana per tick in war only, but you're not usually using all your mana out of war. No rune generation, but that's only 20%. That's not the hugest buff or nerf in the world. War Doctrine, minus 7.5% military casualties. Modest. Nothing crazy, but modest. Arcane Surge, when your mana drops below 40%, you have plus 25% spell damage. So in war, an elf is very similar to a dark elf with plus 25% instant spell damage. But they also have the WPA and the mana per tick, so their output is much higher than that of a dark elf. They have much more defense with a 13-point D-spec. They have similar offense if they can run pure elite. I don't know that they will, but 800 gold on an elite is certainly affordable. So elf is in the running for hybrid play, and even to run sort of as just your main attacker. Minus 20% TPA, pretty big nerf. It's definitely a bigger nerf if you're trying to use your thieves offensively, and you want, if you're trying to run 5 TPA, that's a whole pop per acre nerf. That's like 4 to 5% population. But if you're only running like 3 and a lot of watchtowers, then suddenly it's only half a pop, and it's not as bad. Really strong military, really strong defensively. I think this can run attacker, TM, hybrid, anything you want. Of course, I did not mention, but huge buff with Fountain of Knowledge and Revelations means you're going to scale into the later age. You'll have at least 10% more books than other people. But if I compare my fairies to my elves this age, it was only about a 10% book lead for my fairy. And I would have expected something closer to 20% with both those spells, so, that only really turns into 5% science effect. Maybe it's not that good to have those spells. Maybe I'm overplaying it. Hard to say. But yeah, magically, elf is incredible. Militarily, very strong. Slight penalty here on the thieves, but, that's what watchtowers are for. If you compare them to this age's elf, and elf is about half of the top honor list, you have more defense, more offense, a cheaper elite, scaling with science, a slightly better passive. So all you're losing out on is some runes and the TPA. I think elf is a pretty good spot. Fairy, the wonderful fairy. God, I hate fairy. I've been running fairy for so long, and I just wish I never did. The 30% rune cost is just such a kick in the dick, and it has been for 2 ages, and we keep running them, and we keep not having runes, and you lose out on so much honor farming, and it's just the worst. The worst. So, what does fairy get? Plus 25% spell duration is a big buff because now it's affecting your self spells. So that's 25% more mana not wasted on all of these. 25% WPA is the same, 1 mana per tick's the same, except it's out of war now, which means you do get the benefit from more Tree of Gold while sitting around. And it's a little easier to cast all your selfies without running out of mana. Penalties, minus 10% BE, increased from 5%. That's starting to be a pretty big nerf. That's really hurting your Thieves' Dens, your Watchtowers, your forts, your rune production. And 15% military wages. You're going to be running full elite defense, and it gets pretty rough out there with a greed buff and everything. Either find a way to be uncastable on, or just have a shitload of, econ science with income and bookkeeping, because your wages are going to be high. Other things, Fairy lost Guile and Invis, so they are worse thieves. Similar level of thief nerf to the elf. They also lost a few other things: Wrath, Mist, Guile, so less Night Strike damage, less robbing potential, less fireball potential. They lost Fool's Gold, which is a really good addition for Fairy Mystics especially, so now Fool's Gold is locked behind Necro if you want it. I think that's about it. They lost their Mystic Vortex ability, which was very strong in specific circumstances. So what did they get instead? Leyline Interference. Enemy spells against fairies have a 15% chance to fail. So, a race that already has a WPA benefit, even harder to cast on. Maybe that keeps the greeds away. I don't know. And In-War Doctrine provides minus 7.5% damage from Thievery and Magic instant ops to you in the kingdom. A decent buff, not insane or anything, but pretty decent. So Fairy, absolutely the highest defense, +2 over Elf, as well as greater protections. The BE and wages is a penalty for sure, but their output magically is huge, especially on durations, in contrasting to the Elf's instant damage. Their penalties are rough, no doubt about it, but I think you can play around them, and no more rune penalty is going to be a huge early age buff to Fairy. But yeah, that elite, that's a lot of defense, so very, very good. And I will mention the 8-point offense there. You will be able to send some elites on stuff, especially in late or long wars, especially if you haven't been eating much meteor showers. Maybe you're going to withdraw. You can suicide a little bit. There's some interesting potential for Fairy here, so I wouldn't completely ignore it. Maybe there's a world you play a Fairy war hero. Who knows? They have Quick Feet now, actually. Do they have... Oh, there it had Quick Feet. Anyways. Halfling. 10% populations. They lost a 5% population buff, and they lost 10% of their TPA. They still have +1 stealth regen a tick. 7.5% sabotage damage buff. Nice to always have that. Sneak attack is buffed to its maximum glory. When activated, all thief operations incur 0 thief losses for 1 tick. Spells, Town Watch, Greater Protection. So Greater Protection and a 13-point elite with 10% population. They're in line with Fairy for defense. The difference here is that the net worth inflation on Halfling is going to be really rough with that elite, and it's going to be really difficult to afford that pure elite build. 900 GC without Tree of Gold is rough. But the D-Spec at 11 is not so bad if you have to mix in the D-Specs. 15% military casualties, certainly not fun if you are getting hit. So there's that. Again, maybe an interesting war hero build. The 10-point elite, even more so than the Fairy, you can absolutely be hitting with that, especially in long wars. It's just going to be really awkward when you have to run 20 EPA, and that's 160 base net worth. Add on your land, your science, your wizards, your thieves, you're going to hit 300 net worth per acre very easily, which means that larger 220 net worth per acre orcs are going to just feast on you. So be very careful, and don't be afraid to run a few hospitals. If you get fireballed at all, the hospitals help with birth rate. If you get hit at all, they help with casualties. It's not the worst. It's interesting. Again, rogues that can just auto prop is very scary with no thief losses. You can jump into big assassinate wizards. You can do whatever you want. So a very useful, very strong ability there. And +1 stealth tick means you don't need to run rogue. You can do a lot of things with halfling. You just gotta work around this military casualties. And you know what? Avians have been working with 15% military casualties for a lot of ages now, so we know it's doable. But the military number is a little rough offensively, but pretty strong defensively. No more birth rate penalty, building cost penalty, no more stealth loss penalty. They lost invis and 10% of their TPAs. They're down 20% TPA. Is what it is. They still have that extra stealth regen. Very strong. Human. Human is in an interesting spot. So let's get to it. All land holds prisoners, 2 per acre, which is the equivalent of like 8% dungeons, I think. Something like that. 1 stealth in war, so halfling vibes, 15% science efficiency. By far the single biggest buff any race has is this science efficiency buff. Doctrine in war, which is weird. In war, 7.5% book generation to you and your kingdom, so literally does not help you in war, but it just makes you scale a little more. Unique passive, prisoners generate more gold a tick, mercenaries are a little cheaper. Pretty shitty. Honestly, I don't think the prisoner thing's that big a deal. You can overpop the humans now and get the free prisoners. Probably the economy is pretty good. But I'm not terribly scared of the human economics here. I really think the stealth and the science is where things get interesting. Spells, Fountain of Knowledge, and Rev, so they're scaling for science for sure. And Invisibility and Guile. So these are your sort of new Dark Elf / Fairy hybrid thief. +1 stealth is, basically 33% more thief damage, +10% damage, 10% TPA, and -20% losses. These are all very good scaling thief benefits. Military wages take twice as long to apply. Whatever. To me, that just means that you're going to pay some wages in End of War Ceasefire when you're already rich. No big deal. 50% rune cost is a horrible penalty. Land lusting is going to be vomit-inducing. Fireball runs when chained are going to feel like land lust runs. Even just casting your selfies is going to be brutal. These are all expensive spells that don't have huge durations. So keep that in mind. 50% library building effectiveness loss. In the late age, that is significant. Humans are definitely going to be otherwise wanting to run, say, 20% hospitals. So with the -15%, 50% nerf, in a situation where you had, say, 12% or 20% libraries, that's going to be like, I don't know the math on it. You're going to have basically 30% science efficiency instead of 40 plus, and any other person who ran 20% libraries would have the equivalent of, say, 25% science efficiency. So you're not that much stronger than people once it becomes a library game. Now, you're going to have more books, presumably, with 3 stacking book buffs, but, the science isn't insane, but you save some land if you don't have to build the libraries. You can still scale with the libraries if you want to. So you have to figure it out for yourself. Militarily, a 10 D-spec, sort of boring. 14.9 elite, that's pretty expensive. Very similar vibes to a dwarf here. 1 less defense than a dwarf, 1 less offense than a dwarf. But you do have 1 more warhorse, so you combine those, same offense as dwarf, little less defense. So it becomes up to you if you think 15% science efficiency is better than 25% build efficiency. And that's sort of your trade-off there. And I think most people will say it is, so, it makes me think, why are you going to pick dwarf in the next age changes if you can pick human? Maybe you just really like runes, and that's a fair answer. I always want to see a bonus like this and just abuse it, but I've played so many ages of human that I'm just make it stop, please. I'm done with humans. They're so boring. But I also really like hybrid thieves, so I'll probably have some humans. What are you going to do? And if you compare to Last Age Human, just very different vibes. The income game with much smaller size scaling, very different vibes with the defensive elite and O-Spec. So, meh. Orc, 15% gains, 50% draft cost, Bloodlust, minus 15% DME, 7.5% enemy military casualties. They get 30% more prisoners, and massacres kill more wizards. But let's ignore all that and look at this elite. At only 7 net worth, probably the lowest net worth elite we've seen so far, we have 20 offense. Just insane with Bloodlust, 22-point elite with no other penalty here. Just bonkers. So, of course, elephant in the room, yeah, you're going to get ambushed a lot and easily. Now, there's a world, you mix, say, 2 O-Specs per acre into your build, and you send 1 O-Spec per acre on a hit, and it's twice as hard to ambush you now. Maybe only on TM hits will that matter. The, core hits are still going to be super easy to ambush either way, but you can do just a little bit of work to make it so that TMs can't ambush you. Just a big slate of bonuses. Everyone loves kill stacking. Bloodlust is my favorite spell in the game. Prisoners, when you have offense and kill stacking, is very strong. And what you have here is the penalty, 15% DME. 15% DME, mostly worse than, say, just having an 8.5-point D-spec, because you don't get any net worth savings. But on the other hand, you do get, sort of a bonus to slaying dragons, ? Let's say on average people run 7, heck, call it 8 D-specs per acre. That's 80 defense per acre base. So if you run 10 D-specs per acre as an orc, now you're in line, if not ahead in defense. And is 10 EPA on an orc more than 12 EPA on most other races? I think so. So, in terms of military and kills, gains, draft, the orc is by far your best attacker. It's really going to be all about navigating this elite, getting ambushed, and there's ways to do that if you're faster than people and you can lap them, if you're doing learns or massacres and raises, if you can hit TMs with an O-spec slipped in there. And another one is if you're quadding people, or even say if you're a general and you're using 5 gens on someone. It's really difficult to make the choice to 4 times ambush someone. And if you're not able to do that, I don't know if ambushing at all is very good. Now, it takes some discipline and work to make sure that you can get good quads on people as an orc, but if you're able to do it, I think orc is by far the best. So it's going to come down to your leadership and your personal ability to make that work. Yeah, no TM is safe, and even if you ambush the orc, you still lost all that defense. He gained all that honor, and he's just going to do it again, right? Also, another thing about orc, you're almost certainly not running stables, so that's sort of like a hidden defense buff. As of Last Age Orc, no one played it. Same gains, same draft cost. I don't even remember this passive existing. Same Bloodlust. Those were 2 big negatives that they don't have anymore. And their elite is just way bigger, and it's cheaper. So, yeah, I think Orc got buffed for sure. And finally, Undead. Minus 40% military losses, very strong, I think, especially next age. Plague immunity, no food required, sort of meh. minus 7.5% enemy battle gains to you and your kingdom. I think that's probably the best benefit in a like straight attacker standpoint, at least in terms of like amount of build space that's giving you. So that's good. Passive, Plague is a chance to spread on all successful attacks, 33% chance. I'd like that clarified if that works on ambushes, just because why not? Spells, Animate Dead, sort of a worthless spell, because you already have minus losses. It's more for flavor. So they used to have Hero's Inspiration. That's a really good spell they don't have anymore. 5% OME loss. Not so bad. We'll just consider it like a -1 to their elite. And if we do look at their elites, yeah, basically the same offense as this age, same defense as this age, but no longer penalized with only Thief Ops. And Constant Plague versus the Auto Plague on activation, I would say is probably weaker. I don't like this passive because I just miss when you could get Plague from hitting undead, which you can't right now because they don't always have and is immune to Plague. They just have Plague immunity and a chance to spread on attacks, which is different. It is different. So very little changed undead here. They just get the ability to be thieves, which is a really good buff in a lot of ways. So there you go. I think their doctrine's probably about the best, and in a way, they got one of the biggest penalties by losing this penalty, so yeah, I think Undead's totally reasonable. Oh, they have no converts anymore either, and at a 900 point elite, that's pretty expensive, and you are going to require those elites, and even with 40%, you are going to bleed elites out of war, so yeah. Undead are okay. I think I thought they were maybe a little stronger, but I'm just going to say they're okay. I think they can hold their own against avians and orcs, so fair enough. Personalities. I think this is where we'll see some interesting stuff. Overall, general impression of the races is pretty good. Everything seems to have its place and be pretty strong. I think maybe Dwarf is still just a little too weak. I'm a little unsure about halflings and humans, but I think everything has a place. I think we're looking pretty good. Artisan, 30% building capacity and production, so we're going back to how it was. I believe in revised, the capacity bonus was out. So a slight nerf from last age. 100% success on espionage ops, but no double stealth cast. That's a pretty decent buff. That means if you just want to run a solo artisan, they can really get all of your intel, no problem. No benefit to their whatchamacallit anymore. Words hard. No building credit buff. Sort of mediocre, no big deal. 15% economy science efficiency. Pretty big buff, over 10%. This is probably the strongest science buff for any of the personalities. Maybe tied with Heretic. Everything's got, a single science that it buffs, and this is buffing, 6 sciences, and some would say 2 to 3 of the best sciences, so very, very strong bonus here. Access to ghost workers is great. Greater protection is great. They didn't have GP last age, so all my bounce fans get in on Artisan. I think Artisan's completely viable in general. It can perform a lot of duties. It can be sort of that unit bulking tank. It can be your rune and gold bank. It gets your intel for you that's hard and saves your kingdom a lot of stealth and losses. It's scaling with science. And it's unique. For 6 hours after a successful attack, enemy building efficiency is reduced by 10%. Does not stack. It's cute. Blizzard on hit. And stacks with Blizzard. So, if you can mass someone, raise someone, that's going to help out. When it comes to straight up chaining, maybe doesn't help very much, but it's something. It happens on every attack. I really like the old raise bonus they had, but yeah, Artisan is fine. I think we'll see that I find a lot of other attacker personalities have been buffed a lot more. So, despite Artisan maybe being slightly stronger, I think it's probably still just generally weaker than the rest of the personalities we'll see. Paladin, 5% population. A modest buff. 50% stable capacity and production. A modest buff. Successful attacks inflict 15% enemy casualties, but you also suffer 10% military casualties on offense. Weird to be the only personality to ever have a nerf. 15% Valor Science Efficiency. Probably the worst spell or science effect anyone has. Immune to Plague. Whatever. It's something. Divine Blessing, all daily bonuses on the first of each month are doubled. That's interesting. That's actually really strong. And so, 5% population, call it, let's be ambitious and call this an 8% build space buff. And then this, having... That's like a 25% income boost. It's also like a, 3 ticks of science that you get a day? So, if you're consistently getting extreme, this is like a 4% science efficiency buff in terms of books. It's not bad. I'm curious if this also affects referral bonuses. I don't think so, but it would be kind of funny if it did. So I was ready to really shit on Paladin, but I actually think the passive is maybe stronger than you might give it credit for. I'm going to go ahead and say it's B tier, but it's got some hidden value. Meh. Heretic. Heretic's quite changed. It's gone to this sort of thief-focused thing, but it still has the only access to nightmares and fool's gold. I'm just gonna come out and say it. It sucks. So minus 40% thief cost, whatever. Plus 25% TPA, pretty good bonus. 20% sabotage bonus, good, but it already had that. Guild effectiveness, good, but already had that. Arcane science efficiency, good, but already had that. Invisibility, that's new. So, Steel Warhorse is not good. Just terrible. Worthless on anything that doesn't have much better retention. So, compare it to Last Age Heretic. Guild effectiveness, slightly better than Wizard production. 50% thief lost on operations just isn't here, right? So you have to account for a lot of additional thief losses, which means you need a lot of Thieves' Dens without a buff. So let's say you're running 20% Thieves' Dens, and let's say you aren't forced to also run Watchtowers against rogues, which you probably are, but let's say. Then, okay, you've got a 25% thief buff. That's pretty good. And invis, that's, 37, 38% TPA. You lost 20% spell damage. You're not going to be able to cast Nightmares or Fool's Gold on anyone difficult. But 20% damage, 20% damage, a lot of TPA. I just don't see it being better than Rogue. Like a Rogue that can cast Nightmares but is just worse doesn't seem great. I don't know, guys. I'm not seeing it. I don't know what the play here is for Heretic. So I'm going to say Heretic bad. Just pick something better. Could be wrong, but I don't see why you don't just pick this monster of a rogue. Because +1 stealth per tick is just worth more than the sabotage damage and the chaotic affliction. What can I say? The best benefit here for Heretic is that arcane science efficiency. So if you can stack up your arcane science with just all the books, maybe it'll work out. But I hate losing that sabotage damage or that sorcery damage. So whatever. Mystics. 125% guild effectiveness. So you are now able to run, what, 8%? Is that right? I'll just call it 9% guilds for max effect. You're going to be able to get just a buttload of wizards. I think they lost mind focus. So you are technically probably getting the same or slightly less wizards, but basically the same, and you save a little bit more guild percentage in war. +1 mana a tick, very good. +15% channeling, good. Access to PF, Meteor Showers, Chastity, and Vermin. I believe this remains the only way to get Chastity. And you no longer get 15% mana a day, which was pretty good. You now get +25 or +20% WPA offensively while above 40% mana. And that's a really interesting buff because it's sort of weird how this works with Elf, because you can either choose the WPA or the damage. But because this exists, it's like you're going to be able to cast always just on enemy mystics with your own mystics. It's like all the fairy mystics are going to have Mage's Fury and this buff for like +60% offensive WPA. So it's just going to be an awful casting fest. So Mystic, same as ever. You run mystics. They're really good. What can I say? Rogues, huge buffs to Rogue. 100% Thieves' Dens is a lot. It's the difference between having to run 20% Thieves' Dens and 28%. 8% land in war is nice. They have that built-in 15% TPA. They lost that Assassinate Wizard damage, which was causing problems, I would say. And they lost that plus damage, so in some ways the rogues took two sort of nerfs to countering wizards, but they got a lot of free TPA, and the TD buff is really big. Their sustain's going to be huge for things like prop runs. And now rogues may perform thievery operations while overpopulated. Feels very strong to me for hybrids and core, but I say it feels very strong, but I think in reality it's a meme more than a actual benefit. Yes, you're gonna get overpopulated and you're gonna be able to assassinate wizards on someone, but your assassinate wizards are just weaker than they used to be. Yes, you're gonna be overpopulated and prop someone, but what are you really propping when your net worth's that low? Maybe you can just prop the enemy rogues, and if you hit some good thieves, that's significant, but it's weird. I'm going to say it's just worse than 25% damage, but I think the meme ability here is huge. I can't wait for some 25 TPA Orc Rogue chained to 1 acre to just wreck somebody's unbreakable Halfling Rogue. I'm sure it's going to happen, so that's what I'm hoping for. And especially with mass being nerfed, I do expect more rogues to get chained, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, this is my favorite benefit in the world. When this exists, rogues are always good in my experience, so watch out. Tacticians, 15% attack time, normal, no loss on thieves, normal, 15% siege efficiency, normal, access to clear sight, all the normal things. But what do they get? They get 40% spec credits. And there's some pretty dang good specs out there, so a really decent buff to Tactician. However, I think their passive is dog water. But 40% spec gains with no nerfs is just a really big buff to tax. However, I've struggled a bit to use credits this age for the first time in a while. I don't know if that's just who I ward or how I ward, but you know, something to think about. If you're not able to use the credits anyways, it is a problem. Warrior, huge buff to Warrior. Doubled the effect of Battle Cry to 1%. A really good passive. I think probably the best passive on any attacker. They get Bloodlust and 10% OME, which is much more OME than 15%. It's like 21%. So giving 6% offense buff to the biggest offense attacker. I'll mention, I didn't say it yet, but all of these 25% science buffs got nerfed to 15%. I haven't mentioned it really, but you know, it sort of hurts everyone the same. It hurts things like mystics, rogues, and warriors a lot more than things like tacticians and whatever else that sort of have those shittier sciences. But you know, End of Age Warrior is going to have like 6%, like 4% less offense because of tactics, maybe, but you know, you're overcoming that and then some with these buffs. So Warrior is like auto pick as attacker for me, unless you really want the speed. Like, the thing about 40% more credits is that you have 21% more offense, you're getting 20% more credits, right? Basically. And now you can say, okay, if the tacticians, they attack 15% faster, so they're getting 15% more credits, blah, 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 blah. And don't think about it too much. Just listen to Smiles. Necromancer. Weird pseudo-mystic. 30% WPA, 15% channeling science. Very similar to like mind focus, but no guild benefit. They get the free soldiers. They get a like weird fireball damage buff, but they have no plus. I'm just gonna call them bad. Now, the best honor of the age, last age, was Barco's Dark Elf Necro, sort of hybrid nightmare province that honor farms. They've run this identical province in like 4 other ages I can think of. It's a really cute idea and it works really well. But it doesn't have nightmare, so it doesn't have that easy access to honor. And because wizards or mystics have that 20% WPA buff offensively, it kind of counteracts this. I don't think you need to pick Necromancer instead of Mystic for your hybrid. So there's that. And I don't know. I don't have much else to say. It's so similar to Mystic, and the little soldier things just don't really blend with that. So yeah. Really close to something good here. I'm not sure what it needed. But it's not quite there for me. Maybe if it had like some sort of minus wizard and thief loss thing, since heretics lost it, but yeah, Necro I think is just not as good as Mystic. You know, you're gonna have a small period of time where the raw WPA buff is good. Like, don't get me wrong, they're gonna have per wizard better wizards slightly. They're gonna have better defensive wizards by quite a bit, but they don't have an extra mana and it's going to be a lot harder to get those wizards over time. So what's the point? What's the point? I can't answer that question, so someone out there will answer it, but it won't be me. Oh, we're getting near the end, which is good because my throat hurts and I'm tired. General, +1 general, +20% spec credits, -25% training costs, train elites with spec credits in war, 15% bookkeeping, science efficiency, access to wrath, general's authority, if you send 2 or more generals, +15% enemy military casualties. So, 20% credits, not bad, 1 general. Better this age than most ages. When people's armies are out, they're going to be a lot easier to multi-tap. Everyone's got a lot of offense and no one seems to have a lot of defense. And you add some kill stacking in there is nice. Either their elites are home and you can't multi-tap them, so you get the kills, or their elites are out and you can 5-tap them. Okay, decent. Spec credits, decent, not amazing. Training costs, nah, not doing it for me. Train elites with spec credits in war, really strong, but meh. It being in war only hurts a lot here. Bookkeeping science efficiency is meh. Wrath is meh. I don't see it. I don't see it, boys. Nightmare is in a shitty spot as well, so general. War hero. This is bonkers. We're again in one of those ages where you are forced to pick war heroes if you want to win honor science. And I hate these ages because usually you're just weaker than everyone and then you win honor anyways. Great. But there's some fun things here, I guess. -30% honor losses. I need to remind everyone this is on attacks only. Like, I keep telling the Change Council they needs to put this in because nobody knows this and it isn't obvious, and it's only because I don't know why they won't fix that, but this is on attacks only. You will lose honor to ops at a normal rate. That being said, very strong buff for getting honor. Convert specialists to elites on trads, meh. Converts are nice. Ideally, you have all the elites you want at the start of war, but it helps. It being trad only is interesting. There are situations where you can kind of run a line between converting and not converting if you have, say, a defensive elite. Like if you were a dark elf and you're doing like massacres at some point because you don't want to drop your offense. And if they like chain you, you can landlust. And 17.0 specs kind of sounds fun. So there's something there. 50% honor effects is really strong. You will end up, if you war a bunch, you will end up being a count, and you will end up with really significant honor effects. And the honor effects don't influence your net worth, and they're one of the few bonuses in the game that aren't influencing your net worth, so it's very nice. Honor and glory. All attacks generate honor gains, so I take 100 honor from you, I gain 102.5 honor, is how this is going to work. So, really weird things are going to happen in long wars, especially if there's, like, a lot of attacks going on. To maximize the value you get out of War Hero, in a micro setting, like running a War Hero that has a lot of defense, isn't going to get hit very much or opt very much and can slowly accrue honor, is a really good way to end up with, 1 or 2 really high honor provinces. In a macro sense, you just want to maximize your offense and your attack speed. You want to run avians and attack a lot. You want to run orcs and attack a lot. You want to maximize that attack speed and that offense. So you know, there's ages where this would exist without the O-Spec buff. So the fact that it does have some offense from the O-Spec buff, and depending on the province, that's, more than 10% OME in a way. So, not as good as Warrior for sure. And of course, not as good if you need elites instead of O-Specs. But yeah, if you want honor, go War Hero. It's going to be extremely hard to not win honor with a War Hero comp against other people. So that's my gripe. It is what it is. Overall impression of changes, I think it's going to be a strong age for attackers. I think the massacre spam that we've seen so much of is actually a strategy that does better on attackers than TMs, and so the massacre nerf, I think, is actually a buff to attackers, but it's also attackers doing the massacres, so it's sort of a little convoluted. The war doctrines essentially are all buffs to attackers and not TMs, so, and almost all attacking races have buffs now. Basically, all the TMs got defensive buffs too, so maybe I'm a little ambitious saying it's going to be a strong attacker age, but I think it's going to be a strong attacker age. When you get more offense and more defense in proportion, I think that just helps attackers because they just get more credits. Like nothing else. If you doubled all the numbers but nothing else changed, everything would be the same except attackers would get double the credits. So just keep that in mind. I think warriors are just too good to pass up. So whatever. Interesting things are going to happen this age. I think there's a lot of strong races, a lot of strong personalities, a lot of strong rituals. The doctrines mean you're going to probably have 4 or 5 races mixed in rather than just a bunch of a single race. So, hold on to your boots, everybody. It's going to get fun. I've been Smiles. Thanks for listening to me for the last hour. Let's have a fun age 114. Bye.